Welcome back. Today I'll be going over chapter 20 of Ginger Alden's book, Elvis and Ginger. Ginger says when they got back to Graceland after their trip to Hawaii, she was delighted to discover that the office bathroom had been redecorated in turquoise and white. Even the salon chair that had belonged to Gladys Presley had been reupholstered in her preferred style. Elvis had arranged it to be done while they were in Hawaii. While in Hawaii, sand was kicked up into Elvis's eye, and Dr. Nick had tried to take care of the problem there, but it didn't help. Back at Graceland, Elvis had his eye doctor come to the house, and that's when Ginger learned he had glaucoma. The eye doctor told Ginger that Elvis was a great patient, and he shared a story. The doctor explained that during one tour, pressure in Elvis's eye grew so quickly that he had to be called in to relieve it by inserting a syringe directly into Elvis's cornea. The doctor said Elvis didn't even flinch, and Elvis proudly told her how he had put himself in a meditative state. The doctor gave her aftercare instructions for Elvis's eye, and she got up through the night taking care of Elvis. When Elvis's eye finally felt better, they looked through the Hawaii photos Joe had taken. Elvis chose a picture of Ginger glancing over her shoulder and placed it in a frame beside his bed. Ginger says she told Elvis she needed to go home to unpack and see her family and the dog Odyssey. And she thanked him for the trip, and he gave her some of the photos to take home, as well as the mother of pearl cross. Ginger ran into Charlie on their way out, and he told her, "You know, the only reason we went to Hawaii was because of you." She said being told this was a great end to the vacation. Ginger says she treasured her newly redecorated bathroom as her own sanctuary. Elvis had given her a large jewelry box to keep her new jewelry in. She placed her jewelry and the engagement ring in it. Excuse me. And she says she kept it in her bathroom at Graceland where she felt it was safest. Ginger says she wore dark eye makeup because that's what Elvis liked, and she usually slept with her makeup on. One time when she first washed off her eye makeup, Elvis teasingly said she looked like a 2-year-old and nicknamed her Little Two. From then on, he used that name whenever she was barefaced, while Chicken Neck and Gingerbread became his other affectionate nicknames for her. Ginger says soon after Elvis asked for a childhood photo of her, she brought him a first grade school picture, which he tucked into the corner of the her framed Hawaii photo that was on his nightstand. She says the picture would remain there for the rest of their time together. So Elvis's room was left exactly as he had left it. I wonder if Riley would allow Ginger to visit Graceland and visit the upstairs, and to visit the bedroom and the bathroom, because she was the last woman in Elvis's life. Wouldn't that be a total blast from the past for Ginger? Anyway, Ginger says one night Elvis wanted to show her the high school he attended, so they jumped on his motorcycle without any bodyguards, which she says was a first. As they approached the school, Elvis shouted through his helmet, "Hume's High School!" And they slowly cruised by it. Then they drove by the housing project, Lauderdale Courts, and Elvis told her that it was where he grew up. Ginger says, quote, "As I looked at the older, nondescript 3-story brick building, thinking surely the apartments couldn't have been spacious when he was there, I found it hard to imagine Elvis living here at all. It looked too small for his larger-than-life persona." Then she adds, "Staying so fully aware of his humble roots was the real reason I felt that Elvis was inspired to be so giving to others. He knew what it was like to do without." I 100% agree. Elvis told her with a laugh, "Man, you wouldn't believe how small my home in Tupelo was." She says she hoped he would take her there one day. Ginger says another night Elvis showed her his trophy room, which she had no idea even existed in the house. The trophy room was a long room attached to the music room downstairs. She says the walls were lined with gold records and trophies, and there were gifts from fans. She says there was a framed painting of the Lisa Marie that Elvis said she could have. Ginger says he looked around the room and said, quote, sometimes this seems like it's all someone else's. Ginger says, quote, as I stood beside him surveying the broad scope of all he had done, highlighted here by records, trophies, and photographs, the enormity of his accomplishments hit me full force. And these markers were just the tip of the iceberg. No wonder it was difficult for him to fully fathom that he had experienced all of this. She says they stopped and admired a full-size painting of a young Elvis that had been given by a fan in Las Vegas. In the painting, Elvis was dressed in white and standing in some clouds against a gold sky. Elvis told her she could have that painting too. She was shocked and told him she didn't think it would fit anywhere in her home. Elvis said, in your parents' new home. She asked if it was okay to leave it at Graceland for the time being, and he said that was fine. Upstairs, he gave her another gift, the large ram's head necklace in gold that had diamonds and emeralds on it. Have you seen this necklace? I've seen it. It is giant. Elvis told her, quote, always wear it with something black. Ginger says around this time, Elvis arranged for her to have a bank account and put $5,000 into it, and he gave her a credit card as well. She says this was an overwhelming amount for her since she'd never had checks or a credit card before. She says he continued giving her personal gifts, but she later learned his generosity extended to nearly everyone in his life, doctors, staff, relatives, friends, whom he often surprised with money, jewelry, furs, cars, even houses. He seemed to want to take care of everyone around him. Ginger says she began to notice a pattern. Elvis increasingly struggled to sleep and often needed more medication. She says, quote, he would take his usual sleep packet, then wake up shortly afterward, alert and asking for Tish Henley, the nurse who lived out back with her husband, to bring him additional medication, either pills or a shot of something to help him sleep. She grew increasingly worried about Elvis's rising reliance on sleep medication. She felt that giving him more was going in the wrong direction. Still, she trusted Nurse Tish because she assumed everything was supervised by Dr. Nick. Ginger understood Elvis might be anxious about performing, but wished that she could encourage him to find a healthier, non-medication way to fall asleep. One morning after Elvis called Tish for medication, Ginger worked up her courage and told him, quote, Elvis, you don't really need that. She says Elvis shook his head and said, quote, you don't understand. I need it. She suspected Elvis may have developed a tolerance to his regular medications, which could explain why he needed higher doses. All she could do was hope the medical professionals treating him truly knew what they were doing. Ginger says the day before his next tour began, Elvis brought her home to pack. Aside from the 2 times Elvis had her go shopping for clothes, Ginger hadn't bought any more and had been borrowing Terry's without Elvis knowing. While she gathered her items, her mother set up an ironing board in the foyer, and Ginger handed her one of Terry's garments to iron. Elvis said to her mom, quote, you gotta get Ginger ready. She's gonna marry me. And with that, her mom pretended to iron faster. As Elvis and Ginger drove back to Graceland with bodyguards following, they passed a group of young people with car trouble. Elvis stopped to ask if they needed help, but a woman said no, only to scream in shock when she recognized him as he drove off. Ginger says on March 23rd, they flew to Arizona for the start of the next tour. Elvis flew her brother Mike out a couple of days later to Oklahoma to train as additional security. She says Elvis had wanted him to leave his fire department job and work for him, which was a big decision for her brother. Mike left back home after a couple of days of training. Ginger says she hoped Mike would come on his staff so she could have a family member with her. During a tour stop in Louisiana, Elvis told her he wasn't feeling well. When she touched his forehead, she realized for the first time that he genuinely looked sick. He was sweating and his forehead was warm. Elvis told her he didn't want to push himself and had her call Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick examined Elvis but didn't explain what was wrong, and though Elvis eventually fell asleep, he still felt unwell afterward. After consulting with members of his entourage, they decided to cancel the tour and have Elvis hospitalized back home. Ginger was really worried, but relieved that doctors would finally be able to properly evaluate and monitor his condition. They returned to Memphis so that Elvis could be admitted to Baptist Memorial Hospital. Ginger wanted to accompany him, but he felt so unwell that he insisted someone take her home instead, which only made her worry more. He told her, "I'll call you from there." Ginger says, quote, members of his entourage gathered around and they jumped into action, taking off with Elvis and leaving me at the proverbial curb. She didn't hear anything for hours, so she decided to call Graceland, and Aunt Delta told her she hadn't heard anything yet. Elvis finally called Ginger that night to let her know the hospital was running some tests. He called the next day, and she was glad to hear that he hadn't gotten any worse. When she told him she wanted to see him, he told her no, he needed to discuss business with some people. She found this odd because he usually wanted her next to him. Ginger says, quote, not until after Elvis's death would I hear that when Elvis had taken ill in Baton Rouge, he was informed that 3 of his former bodyguards were going to publish a potentially damaging book filled with hurtful stories about him. She adds, looking back, I strongly feel that Elvis had been discussing this book with others while he was in the hospital and didn't ask for me because he didn't want me to know about it then. It wouldn't be until much later that Elvis would mention the book to me. Ginger says Elvis called again the next day to say he had an intestinal flu, but was improving and wanted her to visit the hospital and show his nurse her engagement ring. Ginger's sister-in-law drove her to Graceland to retrieve the ring. When Charlie answered the door, she stepped inside and was surprised to see Lisa peeking at her from the kitchen doorway. Ginger said hi to Lisa. Then Charlie said, Priscilla's here too. They're in town visiting. Would you like to meet her? She said sure, and then followed Charlie to Dodger's room. At that moment, she thought about when she was younger and would pass by Graceland. She would imagine Elvis and Priscilla and Lisa inside. It was surreal to her to now be in Graceland with Priscilla. And she reminded herself, though, that now she was the lady of the house. Dodger was in bed, and Priscilla was sitting next to her in a chair. Ginger said hello to Dodger, and then Charlie made the introduction to Priscilla, who Ginger describes as, quote, a petite woman with chin-length hair. Ginger sat by Dodger's bed and talked with Priscilla. Realizing Priscilla had likely met other women in Elvis's life, Ginger assumed this interaction must have felt less awkward to Priscilla than it was for Ginger. She said Priscilla seemed nice, and Ginger was relieved, knowing that if she married Elvis, Priscilla would inevitably be part of her life as well. Ginger learned that Priscilla had owned Great Danes in the past, and Priscilla told her, quote, "But don't get too attached to them. They don't live very long." Lisa was sitting on the floor and then got up and began playing with Ginger's hair, which Ginger describes as awkward. I wonder why she thought it was awkward. Was Lisa messing it up? I don't understand why it would be awkward for her. Anyway, Priscilla said, "Lisa, Ginger may not want you to do that." Ginger said to Lisa, "It's all right." But Lisa walked away and sat on the floor again. Remembering Elvis was waiting for her, Ginger told Priscilla she was just stopping by to pick up something. She didn't want to tell her it was her engagement ring. She told Priscilla it was nice meeting her. She said goodbye to Dodger and Lisa, got her engagement ring, and took off out of the house. At the hospital, Elvis, who Ginger says was looking better, he told Ginger that Priscilla was in town. And she told him about their meeting, and Elvis laughed and said, "I wish I could have seen that." Then he added, quote, "It's important that Priscilla and you are friendly for Lisa's sake." Elvis told her he'd be discharged from the hospital soon, and Lisa and Priscilla would be visiting him there before he was. Ginger wasn't prepared for another, quote, awkward encounter, so she left. Elvis was scheduled to go on tour 2 weeks after he was discharged from the hospital. Lisa stayed in Memphis for a few days, and when the weather was nice, she would drive around in the golf cart Elvis had given her. Ginger says sometimes Lisa would go into Elvis's bedroom just to see what they were doing, and Ginger could clearly see how happy Elvis became whenever Lisa was with him. Ginger says, quote, "Lisa loved being at Graceland, and I was glad she and I had gotten to be around each other a little. When it was time for her to return to Los Angeles, Lisa didn't want to leave. She hid, and the bodyguards had to look for her, eventually finding her near the meditation garden. Ginger says Elvis didn't want to do anything but relax before his next tour. One night, he rented out a theater where a small group of them went to watch the Pink Panther Strikes Again. She and Elvis sat in the center of the auditorium, and everyone sat in the same row or in the rows behind Elvis. A few days later, early in the morning, she and Elvis were in his room talking. The toilet in his bathroom started making a strange noise, and as it continued, Elvis became more and more irritated. He got up and walked out of the room, then walked back in holding a machine gun. He walked past Ginger and straight into the bathroom, where he proceeded to shoot up the toilet. Ginger says, quote, "This was upsetting and completely unacceptable. I was more shocked than anything else by this action. I felt a cool stillness come over me. Then I got angry, really angry." Ginger says sometimes it felt like Elvis did things for shock value. She says his cousin Billy later wrote in a book that he thought this incident was funny. Ginger disagrees. She ran downstairs to leave before Elvis could walk out of the bathroom. And as she descended the stairs, she noticed water running down the chandelier on the ceiling. She drove home with her hands shaking and hoped that her leaving would send a message to Elvis that his behavior was not okay. When she walked into her family's home, her mother was already awake because the dogs barked when Ginger pulled up. Ginger didn't want to burden her mom, given her parents' marriage troubles, but she was rattled and told her mom what happened with the toilet and the machine gun. She also told her about the yogurt and gun incident in Palm Springs and the papaya juice incident in Hawaii. Ginger says her mom was disheartened and told her, quote, "I don't want you being in any situation where you could get hurt by someone else." Ginger's safety was her top priority. Ginger knew her mother was trying to look out for her, but she insisted that she truly believed Elvis would never harm her. Ginger says, quote, "At the time I had come home because I needed to clear my head and touch base with all the goodness in Elvis and everything that had drawn me to him." Her mom said she would be supportive of Ginger, whatever she decided to do. Ginger went to her room and she lay awake. She was anxious that Elvis might show up when she wasn't ready to talk. She knew he wouldn't like that she'd walked out. He had reacted badly to that before, but she couldn't just accept behavior she believed was wrong. After finally falling asleep and waking later that afternoon, she told Rosemary what happened. She still hadn't heard from Elvis, and she felt that if she reached out first, he wouldn't truly take her concerns to heart, and she felt Elvis owed her an apology. Ginger and Rosemary ended up leaving the house to go visit friends. When she got home, her mother told her Elvis had called, and when he learned Ginger and Rosemary were out with friends, he asked to speak with Terry. Her mom told him Terry was out of town at a college campus for a Miss Tennessee event, so they hung up. And Ginger waited for Elvis to call back that night, but he didn't. Terry came home the next day and asked Ginger, "What's going on with you and Elvis?" Ginger was surprised and wondered how Terry knew something was wrong. And Terry told her that Terry, was sitting in the auditorium at the college campus when a state trooper came in and asked her to follow him. Terry was concerned, thinking something terrible had happened. She followed the trooper to an administrative building where an angry-sounding Elvis was on the phone for her. Elvis wanted her to go to Graceland so he could talk to her about Ginger. Terry said, quote, "He wanted to send his plane for me, but I told him I couldn't leave because of the event. Plus, I had driven Tony's mother up there with me. Elvis told me to let Tony's mother drive the car home, but I told him she had bad eyesight and it was an 8-hour drive." They finally hung up, and Terry said she was rattled by the call. Ginger was in disbelief that Elvis would try and spin this whole thing around as if she were at fault. She didn't want to break up with Elvis, but she needed him to understand why she was reacting the way she did. She was also very upset that Elvis would call Terry in anger. Ginger says she was invited to Graceland the next day when one of Elvis's aides called. And although she still felt he owed her an apology, she wanted their relationship to work and hoped Elvis's earlier attempt to reach her had been his way of trying to make amends. When she arrived, Elvis was sitting in bed reading The Prophet, the book she knew he often turned to for guidance, especially on matters of love. She noticed a brand new toilet had been installed, and it looked as if nothing had happened. She sat down on the bed next to him and waited for him to talk. Elvis began quoting a passage from the book, saying, "You know, Ginger, when love beckons you, follow him, though his ways are hard and steep. And when his wings enfold, you yield to him, though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you." She realized Elvis had turned to his books to help express what he was feeling, and he had chosen a passage that reflected his emotions. She knew he was making an effort to try and make her understand him. Ginger says no one in the house ever asked her why Elvis shot the toilet, which led her to believe he had either explained it to him or they had witnessed him do something similar in the past. That's it for chapter 20. Stay tuned for chapter 21, where Elvis talks to Ginger about D. Stanley, and he also discusses with Ginger about having more children. See you then.